við þökkum Halldóri kærlega fyrir þetta erindi og mig langar að benda á, já, næst sem sagt erlendi gesturinn mun halda erindi, það hann Jill. Mig langar að benda á að á borðunum eru litli bæklingar sem að þeir dreifa til ykkar og gaman og gagnlegt að glugga í. En Jill Friend talar ekki íslensku. Jill, I hope you have enjoyed the morning and even maybe fast speeding learning Icelandic. But anyway, I would like to introduce you in English and use your language as we have come to this part of the agenda. Well, Jill is founder and chairman of Natural Logic, Inc. and author of The Truth About Green Business. Jill is widely considered one of the founders of the Sustainable Business Movement and was named a member of the Sustainability Hall of Fame. The Guardian has cited him as one of the 10 most influential sustainability voices in America. For more than 40 years, Jill has helped companies and communities design, implement, and measure profitable sustainability strategies. He served in the California Governor's Office developing early sustainability policies and programs, and currently serves as Chief Sustainability Officer of the city of Palo Alto, where he leads the city's climate moonshot. Brent has served as MBA faculty at Meridian University, Presidio Graduate School, and California College of the Arts. He lectures widely on business strategy and sustainability issues. He holds an MS in Systems Ecology from Antioch University and is a seasoned practitioner of the Natural Step, a sustainability framework. He was a founding board member of the Sustainable Business Alliance and serves on multiple directing and advisory boards, including the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, and was twice named one of the Bay Area's top 25 movers and shakers in clean tech. Dear Gil, we are excited on hearing about risk, duty, and the laws of nature. The floor is yours. Okay.
Great.
Fine.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. And a special thank you to Landsbankinn for bringing us to your beautiful and very interesting country to talk about the opportunity here. And thank you all for joining us this morning. I want to talk about sustainability in a different way than it's commonly talked about, not as a matter of compliance or license to operate, although that is very important. Not as an ethical way to do business, although it is, and that's very important. But I'd like to talk about sustainability as a fundamental element of business strategy, contributing to business success and prosperity and brand, and the ability to navigate the risks of a very uncertain future that we face together. And business faces inexorable pressures in many different dimensions. Pardon me 1 second here. And just quickly to go through a few of them, we know this. We see the explosion of a global middle class, hundreds of millions of people moving into the middle class in China. This is driving demand for resources. It's a business opportunity, of course, but it's a pressure on planetary systems. The consuming class is growing enormously, big emerging markets with demands for cars and refrigerators and energy and protein and many other things that stress living systems. Rising demand in many dimensions, global food demand, you can see here both the growing population with growing income translates into growing demand for high quality foodstuffs, putting pressure on agricultural systems. We see pressure on water systems globally, where the demand is rising and the supply is not rising. So again, stressors that are both physical and economic, and will in many cases become security pressures as well. Fisheries, important to you, of course. We see the same kind of pattern where demand is rising and supply is falling. Every major fishery in the world has been in decline over decades. You've made some very important moves in this direction to solve that, but it's a problem that we all live with. And it was summarized very eloquently by John Holdren and Paul Ehrlich. Holdren is presidential science advisor. Ehrlich is professor at Stanford University, and I've changed their terminology a little bit, but the concept is that impact, environmental impact, I, is a function of population and affluence. More people with more money, more environmental impact. In general, we've created technologies, T, that meet human needs and mitigate some of these impacts, but add problems of their own in terms of energy demand and pollution and so forth. So we're in a situation of all three of these factors rising, driving impact even higher. There's a possibility, suggested by Ray Anderson of Interface Carpet, of a different kind of technology that becomes the divisor in the equation. Green technology, clean technology that can actually reduce those pressures. But we live in this matrix, in this equation every day, and you feel it in different ways in different parts of your life and business. And this translates to significant risk for business as well as society. Some examples, just one example of many we could cite is climate change and the rise in extreme weather events around the world. This chart just shows the United States, and you can see a rise in both the number and the economic cost of this is just the over billion-dollar weather events in the United States over the last several decades. And you can argue whether that's driven by the weather itself or by increasing settlement of humans in coastal and other vulnerable areas, but the trend is clear. And that's the short list. Here's even more of the list of some of the environmental and social governance, not the criteria that our friend from NASDAQ talked about before, but the fundamental risks to business viability and success and stability going forward. And I won't read it for you. You recognize many of these. This is the landscape that we operate in. And while there are many risks, these risks can also open up business opportunities for companies that have the foresight and the intelligence and the skill to navigate those risks and turn them into opportunities. This is a long discussion we can have. It's been the focus of our work for decades, but just to name a few: impact on cost and margins, efficiency that saves resources, also saves money and delivers economic benefit. We find that sustainability is a powerful, a powerful driver of innovation in organizations, innovating in industrial processes, in new materials, in offers made to the marketplace, in ways of doing business that all have significant economic value and social value within the organization, as well as outside the organization. Opportunities in terms of license to operate. This is a challenge to many companies as regulatory requirements and reporting requirements rise, as the expectations of the marketplace rise. Fourth, and tremendously important, is impact on brand and reputation. For most companies in the world today, the capital value of the companies is mostly intangibles, not tangibles. It's not the bricks and mortar that's on the financial statement, but it's the brand and reputation. It's very vulnerable. It can be lost very quickly in the case of crises, and it's difficult to build and rebuild. Recruitment and retention of employees, tremendously important. Anybody who's running a business knows how difficult it is and how expensive it is to recruit good people, and even more so to keep them or to replace them when they're lost. And we see around the world a growing preference of especially young employees, but really all across many employee classes, to work with companies that have meaningful ESG commitments. It just makes it, recruiters go to colleges and find that the kids say, I'm working there, I'm working in that kind of company, or I'll find one that does. I won't work with one that doesn't satisfy that. And then in the realm of regulatory concerns, we talk about regulatory insulation. We advise our clients actually not to focus on complying with regulations, but to think about fundamental strategies that transcend or advance the regulations, that have you complying as a side effect, not a focus. The purpose is not to comply. The purpose is to do business in ways where that won't be a concern. And this becomes a way of navigating the question of risk and the inevitable surprises that I mentioned before. If you think about something like the restriction on hazardous substances regulation from the European Union a little over 10 years ago, 2005, when the EU said, we will no longer allow lead, cadmium, mercury, chromium in products being sold here. At that time, half of the global electronics industry was not prepared to comply with the European regulations. 1/3 of the industry's global market. We did a piece for the Wall Street Journal back in that year arguing that this was not just an environmental concern, but actually a violation of these companies' duty to their shareholders. Why? Because they weren't prepared for a major economic impact that they could see coming or could have seen coming. How do we know they could see it coming? Well, half was not ready to comply, half was ready to comply. The difference is that some of those companies, like Hewlett-Packard, who we worked with back in those days, could see how the laws of nature impacted human society and gave a predictor of where the regulations would go. And so rather than waiting for the regulations to force them to move, they moved ahead of the market and had economic success as well as sustainability success. A few other examples, there's many that we could share. Walmart, you know them as the global retail leader. Just over 10 years ago, they announced a profound sustainability strategy, really surprising. There are many, many critics in the marketplace. Lee Scott, the CEO at the time, said Walmart will become a company using only 100% renewable energy, would produce zero waste, and would sell only sustainable products. And bold in itself in 2005, but the thing that was really striking to me was his next statement. He said, we don't know how to do that. Very rare to see a company announce a commitment they don't already know how to meet, but they did. And that told me that there was something very serious in what they did. This has not only contributed hundreds of millions of dollars to their bottom line, it's shifted their brand reputation in the world from a deeply criticized company to one with strengths and, of course, weaknesses, as many others. And equally important, because of their scale, a profound impact on supply chains around the world. We started getting calls from Walmart suppliers within 2 weeks of that announcement saying, we have two questions for you. Number one, what in the world is a sustainable product? We've never heard the term before, but all of a sudden it's now important to us because the big dollars are asking for it. And their second question was, how do we do that? What in the world do we do? So in one move by one company, there was more impact in global supply chains than any move from the EU or the United States Environmental Protection Administration, because it mattered to them. General Electric, just over 7 years ago, launched a program called Eco-Imagination, looking at innovation around products that have energy, water, and other kinds of environmental benefits. They set an initial $10 billion revenue goal for that. At last count, $200 billion in revenue. And that sector for General Electric is growing at twice the rate of their base business. Avery Dennison, the global label manufacturer, these make labels on plastic bottles and the garment care tags inside your blue jeans, a client of ours. They have not only reduced the energy and water use per unit of product by 30% in the last few years. You can think about the economic benefit of that, but they've put sustainability commitments in their corporate vision and corporate strategy at the top level of the company, not living in an environmental department, but at the level of corporate leadership. Interface, I mentioned before, the global leader in commercial carpet tile, set itself on a course almost 15 years ago to become the first truly sustainable industrial company with zero waste and no toxic materials released into the world. Interface delivered through their efficiency programs and waste reduction programs, delivered almost $500 million to their bottom line over a 10-year period, coincidentally equal to their profit in that period. Or put another way, without these programs, this company might not have been profitable. Most of their competitors were not in that same 10-year period. Levi Strauss, another client of ours, in the course of their sustainability commitments, looked at where at the impact of water throughout their supply chain, and did two brilliantly clever moves. One, the major user of water in the life of denim, of blue jeans, is in the garment care. It's the washing of the product at home. It's something the company doesn't control, and in fact, you could say doesn't have responsibility for. What did they do? They changed the instructions on the care tag and said, wash these in cold water. No cost to the company, big resource impact around the world. Levi's CEO will go out to speak in forums like this wearing blue jeans that he'll say he hasn't washed in months, and he's encouraging his customers not to wash them every day or every week, or as often folks do. But Levi's also saw another opportunity here, and they created, through mustering together all their eco-efficiency programs, a product called waterless jeans. Not waterless, no water, waterless, less water. And they thought this would be a strong product in the OECD countries. It turned out it's a strong product in India as well, and in developing this world as well, where the concern for ESG is actually rising much faster than we expect. We think about it as a luxury of advanced countries, but I'll tell you, people who live in Beijing understand concerns about air quality probably better than any of us do, and they are, as they rise into the middle class, making those demands. Waterless jeans is a $500 million product line for Levi Strauss & Company, out of an environmental concern, out of a sustainability commitment. United Airlines, you know them well, pardon me for talking about a perhaps competitor or I guess colleague of yours. United Airlines out of their Los Angeles, California hub is fueling their 20 to 30% of the jet fuel going into those planes flying out of Los Angeles as biofuels, as part of an experiment and piloting that many airlines are doing to shift the impact of airline fleets throughout the world. And Iceland, of course, which you know better than we do, but we see a country here with great opportunity, with abundant carbon neutral energy, with great moves on sustainable fisheries, enormously attractive tourism, and a great opportunity to be an attractor globally for investment dollars that are looking for sustainable investment. I don't know if you mentioned the numbers. EHG investment in the United States has now grown to $1 out of every 6 invested in American marketplaces. It was 1 out of 10 years ago, so you have a sense of the trend. In many sectors, we see that there is more money than there are deals. There are investors who are looking for meaningful investment in sustainable business. You have an opportunity, not just individually in your companies, but in the collectivity of this country, for industries to work together to open up these opportunities. And in addition to the technical components, there are the social matrix of this country and the ethical standards that we feel from many of you, and a history of cooperation in many dimensions. Here's a new dimension that opens up. There's real economic value here. Robert Eccles and Jonas Sianu and George Serafin of Harvard University talked about high sustainability companies significantly outperforming their counterparts over the long term, both in terms of the stock market and accounting performance as well. And I would add to this, it's not just the long term. This is not an opportunity to sacrifice short-term profits for future betterment, because that would just be the reverse of the way we do things now, where we sacrifice the future for short-term benefit. There doesn't have to be a trade-off between those, and these companies are finding they can deliver better near-term gains and better long-term gains as well. And that's why we talk about the fiduciary duty of companies to embrace these challenges, to understand them deeply, to implement them into their businesses in a powerful way, in order to honor both the near-term demands to pay dividends to stockholders, to deliver benefits to shareholders, but also position the company to navigate these business risks going into the future. So these are big concerns. These are complicated issues. They have many dimensions not familiar to most companies. How do you think about them? How do you navigate them effectively? And we would suggest, and this is a short checklist that we offered in the Wall Street Journal back 10 years ago, that fundamentally you need to understand the drivers, the resource constraints, the market pressures that I briefly touched on in the opening of my remarks. Businesses need to face the facts, not the assumptions. The assumptions are that sustainability costs money. It doesn't. Ray Anderson said if your sustainability program costs you money, you're doing it wrong. The assumption is that greener costs more money. A green building, people think, will cost more to build than a traditional building. They know it'll save in operating costs because of energy efficiency, but they think it'll cost more to build. The data is showing that it doesn't. One of our colleagues in California, the Integral Group, has built, at last count, 41 net zero energy buildings, buildings that use no energy from the grid. They gather enough from the energy that falls on the building and sunlight to power the building. They're now starting to build net zero water buildings. Not a concern so much for you here in Iceland, a huge concern for us in California, where we not only have cyclical droughts, but perhaps a long-term shift in the whole rainfall regime of the state, one of the most powerful economies of the world that has a huge vulnerability that no one is dealing with. So they're looking at building at net zero water buildings. The assumption is that better costs more. We know that's true in watches and automobiles, perhaps in food. It's not true, or not necessarily true, in the realm of sustainable business and technology. Businesses need to innovate ahead of the demands, whether the demands from the regulators or the demands from the marketplace. And this is challenging territory, because how do you know? It's hard enough to know what the market wants or is going to want, but there are some stable predictors here in the laws of nature, in the way that living systems have operated on this planet for the last 3.8 billion years. We've had systems that are sustainable, that are efficient, that are adaptive to change, and that are resilient. So that's the clue of how we can anticipate and drive markets and steer by the logic, by the natural logic. That's why we named the company that, rather than steering by the regulations. There are a number of ways to understand these principles in a very simple way. We've been working for the last 20 years with the Natural Step Management Framework out of Sweden that you mentioned before. This is a scientifically grounded approach built on fundamental, incontrovertible science. It was built by consensus across Sweden and has now been exported to the rest of the world, working with companies ranging from IKEA and Volvo and Electrolux to Nike and Interface, in fact, that I mentioned before, looking at how natural cycles function in the world with balances of flows of energy and materials. That's the top drawing. Looking at how we do break those cycles, the things that we do that disrupt the safe functioning of natural systems. There's 4. And those 4 give rise to 4 principles of sustainability built on the disruptions, built on the science, that look at changing our relationship to extraction of materials from the Earth's crust. This is not saying to don't mine materials anymore, but we need to do this in a way that doesn't bring minerals up from the Earth that release into living systems and disrupt living systems. Persistent synthetic materials. We need to reduce our dependence on persistent synthetics, the plastics and chemistry that we make, that can't be safely metabolized by living systems. So this is a change. Both of these are around changes in material selection, but also in the processes of cycling and recycling at a grand scale. Productivity, because fundamentally our wealth comes from the ability of Earth's photosynthetic systems to capture energy from off-planet and bring it here to drive the processes that give us food and humans and technology and symphonies, all driven by this ability to capture photosynthesis. So we need to not degrade our productive systems through overforestation and toxification of the oceans and so forth. And fourth, and this is really challenging for companies in the United States, I suspect less so here, is we need to not create barriers to humans' ability to meet their needs, to meet their basic needs around the world. It's challenging in the United States because some people think, oh, that's a matter of philanthropy, that's not a matter of business. That's policy, that's not business. But in fact, it is a matter of business, whether on an ethical basis or on a concern for geopolitical security. A world full of have-nots is not a stable world and not a sustainable world. So 4 very simple tools that provide a guidance system for companies. It's not just a list of things to be concerned about and pay attention to, but it's a list that has directional, testable vectors. Because what you want to know as an enterprise is, am I doing the right things? Are they moving me toward my goals or away from my goals? Are they moving me faster or slower than other strategies? And this provides that directional and testable vector that, in our experience, lands well in the executive suite, and it lands well in the offices, and it lands well on the shop floor. And it works for 3rd graders. Everybody can get this in a very substantial and powerful way. And in fact, when IKEA brought this to their company back in the 1990s, they were surprised to find that their suggestion boxes across the company were blown out. They got so many suggestions from employees they'd never gotten before because people had new eyes. They had new distinctions. They could see things they weren't seeing before, even down to the people on the loading dock who would sometimes refuse shipments of products arriving into the IKEA warehouses because they were in violation of the company's commitments to these principles. So what happens in a company when the sustainability leadership isn't just the sustainability department, and it's not just the executive leadership, but it's everybody in the organization? with a shared commitment and a shared understanding and a shared set of eyes and ears to notice opportunity and an opening to bring that forward into the company. Another tool that we're finding very powerful, this is much newer than the natural step, but it's built on the natural step, is future fit for business, which argues that we need to shift the focus away from today's best practices. Today, when we measure performance and benchmark performance, which is one of the things you're doing, we tend to compare current practice. Are you doing better or worse than the folks today? We look at past trends. Are we doing better or worse than the past? This suggests let's look at business measurement in relation to the needs of the future and see how well the enterprise is orienting to that, which becomes a predictor of risk and a predictor of vulnerability and potentially future success. Grounded also, as is the natural step, in science-based definitions of what it takes to be fit in the future. So these are two of many emerging tools, two that we find particularly powerful. So how do you figure out the future? How do you know where to go in an uncertain world with many competing interests? And we would suggest that stepping back and looking at the fundamentals, unchangeable, incontrovertible science, the operations of living systems, the rules that we can derive from that. Robert Kennedy, many of you may know the name of, was Attorney General of the United States, was a senator, was a presidential candidate before his life was cut short, said that there are those who see the world as it is and ask why. I prefer to see the world as it might be and ask why not. So that's the invitation here. We're actually, all of us, in the business of creating a future, whether we think about it in that way or not. Every decision we make as businesses and as customers, every investment we make as investors, every time we put some money on the counter to buy something, we're voting for a future. We're driving a chain of events that gives us a world. And we have the opportunity to choose the kind of world that we want and to create it through enterprise, through intelligent investment, grounded in the concerns that we share to produce businesses and economies that serve those goals. Over the gates at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, there's a sign in Latin, aut inveniam via ad facia, which means we will find a way or we will make one. That's the opportunity that we have before us. Thank you.